Since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, humanity harnessed the power of providing our large, growing infrastructure by powering our machines with several different types of fuels. For the longest time, we never fully understood the consequences of polluting our atmosphere with these fuels. Only in the last 100 or so years, we have begun to comprehend the negative results we have set in place by the continuous use of fossil fuels. Nowadays, one of the largest controversial topics that comes up is environmental pollution and carbon emissions. Hello, my name is Kevin Vasquez, and the purpose of my speech is to persuade my audience that environmental pollution is a global concern and that humanity must do its part to reduce our carbon emissions. Carbon emissions have been steadily increasing by 3.7% every year since 1990, according to the EPA. This number will only increase if we do not take the necessary steps to reduce our carbon footprint. Now, let's begin to discuss ways we can reduce carbon emissions. Let us begin by first understanding our current state of affairs towards carbon emissions. Human activities are responsible for almost all of the increase in greenhouse gases in the atmosphere for over 100 years, according to the EPA's article, Sources of Greenhouse Gas Emissions. In this publication, the EPA goes into the primary sources of greenhouse gases and the percentages they take up in the overall total emissions we emit to the atmosphere. Here, we can see that primary sources of emissions in the United States are transportation at 28.2%, electricity production at 26.9%, industry at 22%, commercial and residential at 12.3%, agriculture at 9.9%, and land use and forestry at 11.6%. These emissions, like stated before, have increased by 3.7% every year since the year 1990 and will continue to rise. Now that we more clearly understand our current state of affairs towards carbon emissions, let's see the ways that humanity has come up with to combat our continuously growing emission count. In the Union of Concerned Scientists article, Climate Solutions, We Need to Act Now, they tackle several topics that go into cutting emissions. In the article, they describe that to avoid the worst consequences of climate change, we must reach net zero emissions. What does this mean? This means that no more carbon is dumped into the atmosphere than we take out. Besides achieving net zero emissions, we would also have to massively transform electricity production and distribution, as well as better transportation systems. This makes sense because, as we discussed earlier, transportation and energy production together total at around 50% of our total carbon emissions. Tackling these big contributions towards emissions will be a challenge, but if it can be achieved effectively, we can reduce our overall carbon footprint by a large margin. There are many ways we can reduce emissions in these fields. For example, in John Woolard's article, Beyond Renewables, How to Reduce Energy-Related Emissions by Measuring What Matters, he highlights many ways we are currently handling this issue. Solar and wind power are zero carbon energy sources and account for 14% of global energy. The only issue with these forms of power are that they can be intermittent. Because of this, society depends on fossil fuels to provide power when the other sources cannot. Due to these actions, we aren't helping the situation any further. We need to come up with a better approach of integrating zero carbon energy sources to our energy supply and rely less on fossil fuels. Another area we need to further move our efforts into is transportation. The EPA has already begun setting a plan to ensure that we can significantly reduce emissions in transportation. In their article, Routes to Lower Greenhouse Gas Emissions Transportation Future, they label 3 routes to reducing our emissions from transportation. These ideas include increasing the efficiency of vehicle technology, changing how we travel and transport goods, and using low carbon fuels. We need all 3 to help achieve our societal goals on climate. With the increase in electric vehicle technology, we have achieved vehicles that emit zero harmful emissions. By strategically optimizing the routes we take and using more efficient forms of transportation when it comes to travel and transporting goods, we can emit less harmful gases. Lastly, by using less carbon or by moving into other forms of renewable gas, electricity, and hydrogen, we can also make a big impact on our overall carbon emission reduction. In conclusion, we talked about a big issue that humanity is currently dealing with. Carbon emissions are polluting our atmosphere and making the planet warmer. We must take the necessary steps to ensure we are reducing our overall carbon footprint so that we do not cause further harm to our planet. To do this, we must all take our part in reducing our emissions. You can do this by making some adjustments to your daily routine to ensure you reduce your own amount of carbon emission. These can be small things, such as taking alternate forms of transportation when possible, or even walking or biking if it's convenient. Other things you can do are investing in solar panels, energy-efficient appliances, or even an electric vehicle. Powering off lights and devices can also help, as well as programming a thermostat to turn off heat or AC when you aren't home. Finally, you can reuse and recycle materials and try to lower your water usage. These things may seem minuscule, and you might think that this will not help, but these small things can make an impact towards our overall carbon footprint. Like Barack Obama once said, change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones we have been waiting for. We are the change that we seek.